Hello, welcome to Maya 101, and this is part 6 of our fundamentals playlist. Hope you're enjoying the series so far, assuming that you are following along. Even if you're not, that's okay. Hope you go back and check out some of the videos you've missed. I try to put the topic of conversation in the title of each video, so hopefully that helps a little bit to kind of get some context on which video you want to watch if you're not just watching all of them. As always, this series is relatively unedited, just like it would be in a normal classroom. So I don't really edit out my, ums and ahs and that kind of thing, as much unless it's really bad. So in this part 6 here, I wanted to start talking about the Hypershade. Now the Hypershade sounds very, futuristic and sci-fi and stuff like this, but it's not really. This is the name they have for the material editor in Maya. So this material editor is very easy to find. This little kind of blue cue ball looking icon here up in the status line next to all these kind of film clackerboards, whatever you call those things. It's kind of stuck right there. And you see their display Hypershade window. You can also go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade right there. So let's left click it and open. It'll open a new window. And it'll look something like this. Yours may look different depending on how you've arranged it. Like mine here, you can go in here and there we go, kind of click and drag on these lines to arrange things, change what these windows look like. This is the editor used for creating materials in Maya. So we talked last lesson about materials and textures a little bit, and how a material is essentially a container that textures can go into to control the look of an object. We also talked a lot about UVs and how you're laying out your UVs so that your textures will display properly using those texture coordinates. So in the Hypershade here is where we can kind of use different nodes and plug them together to create what's called a Hypershade graph, or a network of Hypershade nodes, that kind of thing. So up here, this is a brand new scene in Maya, nothing in here, but you'll see we do have these 4 elements listed in this big black box up here. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. Oh, too big. There we go. So these 4 nodes are default shaders or materials found in Maya. So Lambert 1, we talked a little bit last time. Lambert 1 is the default material for any object you make. So you make cubes and spheres and stuff, they'll always be this kind of gray material. This is Lambert 1. And the good rule of thumb is you never touch Lambert 1, just leave it alone. This next 3 here are materials that we don't really need to mess with for the sake of what we're going to talk about today. Just note that they're default materials for like creating particles. You'll have a default particle shader. If you create, shader glows and standard surfaces, whatever, they'll kind of come with these different default shaders, or they're just here by default when you make a new scene. So you don't have to really worry about them. You don't need to delete them or anything like that. You can just leave them in there and kind of ignore them. That's fine. I'm just going to make this full screen. So this area here, and forgive me, I don't really call them by maybe their actual names, but essentially this big black area here is a list of the different nodes in your scene that match the category of these tabs. So you'll see here materials. So I'm currently in the materials tab, so all the different materials of my scene are displayed. Textures, utilities, rendering. Okay, we have a default render layer right there. Lights, cameras, we have 4 default cameras, front, perspective, side, and top. Shading groups, we have our initial particle shader and our initial shading group for the Lambert 1. Bake sets, projects, asset nodes, and so on. So just different categories of objects that you can display based on what tab you're in. Most of the time you'll be in the materials tab. Every now and then I'll switch to textures or lights or something, but materials is definitely 90% of the time where it will stay. And this is just so you can see them and list and select a material and see all the attributes of that material way down here. So this over here is kind of an attribute editor of that material. You can see all different sliders and things. So this right here is the node editor. So this is where most of the work is actually done, where you're connecting and disconnecting nodes. And we'll get to that in a bit. Over here on the left side is the create bin. or create window, I should say, and all these different categories of nodes you can create here in the Hypershade. So there's literally hundreds of them. Then we have bins. We're going to get into bins. That's probably more of a video on its own to talk about bins, but just for the sake of beginners, we can ignore bins for now. Up here at the top right, we have the material viewer. And it kind of shows us a material. You can use your camera controls, holding Alt, left mouse button, and drag to rotate the camera and so on. And you can change this displayed object here by just these little drop-down menus if you want to show your material on different meshes to kind of see what it looks like, things like this. Typically oh, I made a mistake. it got really slow with the hair. Typically I'll just keep it a sphere or use the default shader ball. And the idea behind the shader ball, in case it's not obvious, is you kind of see what your material looks like on different curved surfaces and stuff like that, different angles. Okay, so like I said, I think I've pretty much caught all the different major windows. Obviously, just like anything else in Maya, there's lots of buttons here, and majority of the time you never have to even mess with them or touch them. But whenever you want to create a material, you know, for the first time, you're going to go through to certain kind of steps. So what I tend to do is I'll have the Hypershade like on a different monitor, which doesn't really help for recording a video because you won't be able to see it. So for the sake of this, I'm going to close this actually. All right, I'll go to Panels, Saved Layouts, and let's go to Layouts and say 2 panes side by side. So this kind of breaks our window up into 2 windows. And over here, for the right side, I'll change this panel, and I'll just say panel. So panels menu, panel, and I'm going to put the Hypershade in this panel. So I'm going to close the channel box. I'll go ahead and I'll close the outliner for now, just so we can kind of see. So here we have half our screen is the Hypershade, and then the other half is our perspective window. And you can, you know, manage this to see how much space you want to give to each window. Okay, cool. So if you want to make a material, you know, depending on what you want to make, you can do lots of different things. And first of all, we want to create a new material. Okay, so first let's get an object in here. I'm just going to, for the sake of this, I'll make a sphere. That's fine. I'll hide the grid. Okay, so there's lots of ways of making a material. What I've done in the past most of the time is I'll right click and hold on the model, assign a new material. You can have this option here, and then it gives you this list. If it looks very similar to this right here in the Hypershade, of different materials you can apply. So Lambert, for example, we'll make a new Lambert. There's also Blend. There's layered shader, Fongy. You can see them here. Lots of different kinds of materials. And we'll talk a little bit about the basics. So the 3, or actually the 2 basic materials are Lambert or Blend. Okay, I'm going to make one of each. So I'm actually going to close this. I'm not going to make a new material on this thing. I'm just going to go over here and on this create window, you can see create. I go to Maya, and I'm just going to make this. You can see lots of different other kinds of materials all listed out here. So we can narrow it down even further to surface. So now we have just this list, okay, a little bit shorter list. And we can also go to, let's say, we'll keep it at surface. So blend, if I left click once, don't double click or you make 2. I'll left click once, and it creates a blend material. And you see my list up here gets blend 1 gets added. And it shows up here in the work area, this node editor. You can see here blend 1. It has this box with all these different things in it, with these like red and green dots, and this blue box over here, all kinds of weird stuff. And you can see that they're connected with this line. Just really abstract alien stuff if you're not familiar with what all this stuff is. And then I'll click on Lambert as well. And you see here it just kind of stacks them. I'm just going to tap the space bar to make this my dominant window. I'm just going to drag these around a little bit just to kind of disconnect them. There's also a button up here. If you look at this one, rearrange graph. This button right there, it's kind of hard to tell, but this little blue button with the arrow. If you click this, it'll kind of arrange your graph a little bit more cleanly. Okay, so here we can see 2 materials. We'll see up here we have Lambert 2. And you can see as I click on these, the different boxes down here also highlight. And so the main difference, you can especially see it in the thumbnails up here, is between a Lambert and a blend. Is first of all, a blend is very shiny and kind of reflective. You can see that here with our material viewer, while a Lambert is not. This is considered a matte surface, otherwise known as not shiny surface. Matte and shiny. That's kind of opposites of each other. So if you want any kind of specularity, which means kind of highlights from light reflecting off a surface like plastic or glass or metal or anything like that, you're going to want to use, in the beginning at least, a blend, because it has those kinds of surface qualities in the material. A Lambert does not. It has no ability to have a specular highlights or reflections or anything like that. So you got to keep that in mind when you're making or choosing your material. And so of course you see there's other materials to choose from. They all have their different kind of traits, like such as a Fong, for example, or a standard surface, or use background shader, and all these different kinds of different materials. But for the sake of keeping it simple for starting out, there's blend and Lambert essentially. There's also anisotropic and stingray and all these different things. And I definitely encourage you to explore and look around. So you definitely can see here, if we compare, I'm just going to drag this box next to this one, ignore the blue boxes for now, the different attributes we have here. They share, if we click between them, they share the common material attributes up here, which are color, transparency, ambient color, and so on. But then beyond that, they start to get different. So here we get specular shading for the blend, while Lambert does not have that. It skips to special effects below there. So keep that. So typically, if you want to make like wood or paper or carpet or something like that, for the most part, you'd use a Lambert. For almost anything else, use a blend. So blend's actually a very common material to start with, because even if you don't want a lot of specular reflectivity or so on, you can lower this number down. You can adjust the specular color. See that as I lower that specular color down, the specularity gets less and less. So you can definitely kind of dial that in with these different sliders, and I definitely recommend playing around with these. And like we talked about in the last video, these mapping buttons, these checkerboard icons, you click on these to add textures to them. Okay. So here in the Hypershade, we've clicked these buttons over here to create those particular materials in our scene. So now what can we do with that? Well, we can apply textures to them. So we talked about before how you can create textures in other programs that are not Maya. Typically you'll make textures in something like Photoshop, or more recent decade, the most recent 10 years or so, Substance Painter has become the go-to texture authoring tool is Substance Painter. Like I said last time, I definitely recommend getting access to those if you can. So those really are the most professional ways of creating textures, is using Substance Painter, and also, and to a lesser degree, Photoshop. Substance Painter for sure. That's what I'd recommend. So we can also, if you go over here on the left side, again, you have Maya category, and we're in the surface category here in the create window. And then we have 2D textures, 3D textures, environment textures, and other textures. So Maya comes with these different procedural texture nodes. Procedural meaning that they are created through an algorithm and not through an authoring tool. They're not a custom texture for an object. They're just a procedural or an algorithmically created pattern. Okay. So for a 2D texture, which is 99% of the time what you'd want to use, we have things like checkerboard and this bulge and cloth. Now the file 2D texture is what you create. You see that comes in there to browse your computer to find a file you made in Photoshop or something like that. So that's what the file texture node is for. You see when I clicked it created an empty file, file 1. And you can browse and find a texture. I'll just delete that for now. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to, checkerboard's really easy to visualize. So I'll click on the checkerboard texture, and you can see here it comes with this purple box over here, very similar to the blue box over here. So these blue and purple boxes are nodes that control different things about in the blue box here. This is a SG, meaning shading group. They control the different behind the scenes aspects of the material. Again, 99% of the time you won't even mess with this. You won't even do anything with it. Same over here with this Blend 1 shading group, SG. Now for the checker texture, we have this placement or place 2D texture node. And this is controlling how the texture is displayed on the model as far as an algorithm goes. Like you can say, if you look over here, you can repeat UV. You can tile the texture more than once. So here by default is set to 4. And if you recall from talking about UVs, the U stands for the x-axis, left to right, and the V stands for the y-axis, up and down. So if we repeated more in the U, for example, we have 2 boxes here, U and V. On the left side, U, make it 8. Notice that we have more boxes going left to right than we do going up and down now. So that's kind of what that's for. And there's other things here. Again, you can mess with this, like I just showed. You can, repeat things. You can change how things wrap and stuff. But a lot of times I won't really mess with it. I'll just mess with the actual checker node itself. All right. Anyway, so now we have this checker texture. I'll bring it over here next to the Lambert here, and so we have, if you look really close at it, these circles coming on the left side and on the right side, and all the nodes that you see here have those. So again, this is getting into kind of node editing and connecting nodes together in different ways. And really, almost anything in Maya is a node and has what are called inputs and outputs. Okay, so anything coming in to the node comes in on the left side. So this place to the texture node is connecting to the checker 1 node, coming in through the inputs on the left side. Now anything the checker is creating and spitting out to connect somewhere else comes out on the right. So you see out alpha, out color. So these outputs on the right side of the node. So we have out color. And over here we have, on our Lambert, we have a color attribute with an input on the left side. Right? So remember, right side is outputs, left side is inputs. So we have out color and input color over here. So I can click on the out color green circle. I get a little snaky wire here. I can drag it over, and you can see that some of these things will gray out. We'll talk about why later. But I can connect it to the color input, and it connects to the material. You can see here in the material viewer now, we can see the checkerboard on the Lambert material that we have. So I connected the output of the color of the checker 1 node to the input of the color on the Lambert 2 material. And we can do this for lots of things. I can just connect, however many things will let me, incandescence, for example, normal camera even. So whatever these do, I can have multiple connections for one single output. Now if I were to make another texture, let's say I go over here and create like a noise texture. I'm going to arrange my graph because, there we go. So here's that noise all by itself. So it's another texture node, very similar to how the checker's oriented, out alpha, out color. Inputs coming over here with their place 2D texture node, same idea. So I can out color this one and go to the color input there, but you notice that it disconnects the checker. So you only have one input connected at a time, but one output can connect to multiple inputs. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And you can kind of see here we're getting the result where this noise texture is in the color of the material, while this checkerboard are connected to the ambient, incandescence, and so on. So we're getting this kind of multiple textured effect here. Okay, so that's kind of your basic idea of how you can create a shader or a material by connecting all these different textures to the different attributes. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to delete those 2 connections. So now I have this checkerboard connecting to the ambient color and this noise, and I can rearrange these graphs as much as I want, connected to the color of the Lambert. So you can kind of see the result we're getting over here, where the ambient color, like this kind of inner color of the object, if you will, is a checker pattern, but the outer shell or the border, the color of the object is this noise. And if we want to disconnect this, I can click and select the actual arrow, the wire itself, and I can delete it, like so, or I can connect something else. So out color here, again, I can connect to incandescence, for example, and again, get kind of a glowing effect It looks very similar to the ambient color in this material view, but over here you can kind of see in this thumbnail. So incandescence, if you're not sure, you know, incandescent bulbs are light bulbs that glow. So it's kind of like a glow effect, and the checker is now controlling that. So I can just, you know, disconnect things by, you know, clicking on the arrow and pulling it off, or clicking on the arrow and deleting it and connecting something else. So this to color and this to incandescence. So now it's kind of got this different look to it. You can go in here to the noise, for example, and you have all these different, you know, values for changing, you know, the amplitude and ratio and frequency. So how noisy is it, right? Just play with all these different sliders to get like a specific look that you're going for with these different procedural effects. Change the color of the checker. Instead of black and white, I can make it, you know, for example, you know, pink, and make it green or something like that. Kind of Power Rangers, I don't know, something like that. There you can see it there. So I'm going to press the space bar again. I can see over here my sphere. So to apply my material to the sphere, there's a few ways to do that. We can middle click on my material and drag it over to the sphere and let go. Now I need to press the 6 key, and there we go. Now I can see the texture on the sphere. Let me undo that. Another way to do it, make sure the 6 key turned on, is I can select the sphere and then right click and hold on my material and say assign material to selection. So any objects I have selected in my scene, I can right click on the material, assign material to selection, and it will apply it that way as well. And then finally, another way is I can select the sphere, I can right click and hold, and assign existing material, which is a list of all my materials: Blend 1, Lambert 1, Lambert 2. This one in particular is Lambert 2. I can highlight that one and let go, and it will apply Lambert 2. So several different ways of applying different textures. You can also apply materials, I should say. You can also apply materials to faces. So let's say I undo this. Right click and choose faces. I'm going to select, you know, a bounding box of some faces here. Right click on the material, assign material to selection, and there just those faces now have that material applied. And the rest of it has Lambert 1 applied. Now if I start dragging Blend 1 on here, it's going to overwrite that. So you have to be aware of that. So if you want certain faces to have one material and you want the others to have the other, what I recommend doing is once you have these selected, hold shift, left click and drag a box. It'll actually invert your selection. So now I can right click on Blend 1 and assign that one. And so when I change Blend 1's color, for example, to green or whatever, it'll show up. So now I have two different materials on the same object. So things like this. Now this is very much the most basic way of using the Hypershade, is creating your materials, applying textures, and so on. And a lot of times you don't even have to use the Hypershade to do that, like we used last video, where we click on the checkerboard icons. It's the same idea. If I click on Lambert 2 to select it, and let's say I'm going to apply a transparency map to this attribute. So I click on the checkerboard icon of transparency here. It'll ask me what kind of texture do I want to apply. So let's say I apply it, you know, let's do mountain. Okay, so now you'll notice, I'm just going to tap the space bar again and make this my main window. That mountain texture came in and automatically connected to transparency. So that I didn't have to actually connect it myself. That's why when you click on these checkerboard icons, you're telling it which attribute you want to connect it to. So you'll see here getting a really psychedelic, you know, kind of 60s look to that kind of material. Now that we have that transparency of a mountainous pattern on there. And again, all these textures have all these different attributes you can play with to adjust, you know, how much of an effect that we're getting. Like so. Just kind of play with it and see what happens. Groovy. So you can see here with this Lambert 2, for example, got 3 textures applied to it now. Now if you ever want to, let's just say I want to look at, say I make a new material or whatever, and it's not showing up here in this node editor. If you click on Like for example, Lambert 1, you don't see Lambert 1 down here in my working space. So I can click on Lambert 1, and then here I have these 3 buttons, these 3 square buttons with these different arrows. So the one on the left shows, well, will display, I'll just do it, left click it, there we go. There's Lambert 1, and if I had any textures applied, any inputs coming on the left side, that's where the arrow is on the left side of this box, anything's connected to the left side, that will also be displayed. This one on the right side, if I click Lambert 1 and click that button, anything connected on the right side will be displayed as well. So you see here these shading groups are being displayed. And if I click the Lambert 1 and click the middle button, it'll show left and right. So let me click on my Lambert 2, for example, and click the middle button. It shows all the textures on the left and the shading group on the right. If I click the left button, it does not show the shading group on the right side, only shows the textures. If I click on the right button, it only shows the shading group and not the textures. So it's like, do you want to display the selection with the inputs, with the outputs, or both? That's what these 3 buttons do. So typically, if I want to really quickly display a materials graph, I'll click on it and click that middle button to show all left and right connections, and it shows me everything. Now, if you know for a fact that there's nothing to really do over here on the right side, which 99% of the time it's not, you can just show the inputs and just show all the textures like this, a little bit of a cleaner look. So that's why over here, if I go back to, I'll look at the attribute editor, okay. So if you wanted to kind of travel between the different nodes, so the color node attribute here has that, I think it's the noise pattern on the color, right? I forget now. But if I can click on the black, you can see at the input box, that's what this means, and I'll get to, oh, it's a checker, right? The checker node. And over here, again, those same boxes, I can click on the input of the checker, which is, if you remember, it's that 2D placement node, that blue box. And here we are, place 2D texture. I can go to the output of this, which, where is it connecting to? The checker. Where is this connecting to? The output of this, to the material. Okay, so that's how you kind of traveling through the graph of these 2 buttons. So you don't even necessarily have to have the Hypershade open. Now where you get a little bit iffy though, is like, well, I have 3 inputs on this material. If I click on the input button, which one's it going to go to, right? It's going to the checker right now, but what if you wanted to go to the ambient color? Well, you can, or the incandescence, you can click on the black arrow here, and then it will go take you to the noise pattern that's being connected to the incandescence, and then back and forward. You can also see that we have these checker noise and mountain tabs up here too. So it's a little bit not as hard to get to as as I implied. You just kind of click on these tabs to get to those different inputs really quickly. Okay, so the Hypershade, there's a lot more to the Hypershade, of course, but for the sake of kind of a beginner's look at it, that's really what we're going to cover, is just creating materials, attaching textures to them, and then applying those materials to objects. Right? That's essentially what you want to do when you're first getting started. Now, if you want to, say, delete stuff, well, if I, say, click on Lambert 2 and say delete, it definitely deleted the material. It's no longer applied to the sphere. It turns green when there's nothing applied to it. But all these textures and stuff are still there. So let me undo that. Let's say you wanted to get rid of all of this. Like I don't want this material. I don't want any of these textures or anything. I would need to open up the Hypershade and display inputs and outputs, select everything, and delete, like so. You can apply textures and saying, if I look at the textures tab, you'll notice now it's empty, of course, because I've deleted those textures. But let's just say, again, I'll apply a transparency, checker, looks like so. If I click on the textures tab, now you see I have a checker 1. So this texture is listed here in the textures tab on the top section here, where it lists all the different things in your scene. Materials, textures. Okay, so there's obviously more things here. There's Arnold, which is another whole beast of a thing. But again, just to get you started, okay, that's the idea. Get you started. I'm going to show you just a few things here. So that's the basics of the Hypershade. Now I'm going to show you a couple more things here. Again, we have a blend active, and I've applied a checkerboard texture to the transparency of the blend. But I want to notice something. Even though the transparency is this grid or checker of a pattern, even where the material is transparent, I can still see the reflection of the sphere. Do you notice that? how even where the surface where it's not green here, you can really see it right there on this corner. Like even when the green is invisible, the surface is still visible with this reflection look because I have a blend material which has this reflection capability, right? So if you want to make something look like a basket weave or something like that, where but you also want it to be shiny, okay? So you have a transparency on a shiny material like a blend. You also have to mask or hide the shininess with that same transparency, okay? So if I click on the blend here, I can see I've applied this checker to the transparency, right? And that's what we're getting here. But also all this specular stuff, I'm still seeing it here. So here, I'm going to show you a trick here. What you can do, I can middle click the checker, drag it over here. Notice how I can mouse over these different attributes and have this dotted square around the attribute. So let's say specular color, for example. If I click on that, it applies it to specular color as well. Okay. So what about reflectivity? I can middle click and drag to reflectivity and apply it to that. Middle click and drag to, let's say, eccentricity. You can see here it's changing the look. I probably wouldn't do it to eccentricity actually. Eccentricity kind of controls the size of the hot spot that you get. Now another thing you're going to notice here is, okay, I applied the same, and the technical term here is mask. I've applied the same checker pattern to the transparency and to the specular color, but I'm still seeing the reflections where the color is not, right? But I'm not seeing reflections where the color is, and you actually want the reverse of that, right? You want where the color is to be shiny and where the color is not to not be shiny. So here we're using the same checkerboard. So what you could do is create a second checkerboard and reverse the pattern. So instead of color 1 being white and color 2 being black, you can do the opposite. But I'm going to show you a really quick utility. So over here in utilities, there's maybe not hundreds, but there's dozens of utilities, right? There's lots of them. So I'm going to look for a certain one. There it is, reverse. Reverse, okay. Left click reverse. This creates a reverse utility node. Okay, so how does this work? So again, we have our inputs and outputs, right? So if we take our out color from the checker and place it into the input, make sure I get that right, there we go, of the reverse node, and then take the output of that, okay, the output of that, and where it's being connected into specular color and like reflectivity and so on, we can go to specular color, for example. And here you can see now we're getting the opposite, where the green is shiny and where the green is not shiny. So I reversed the pattern for the same texture, right? So I have the white and black going to transparency. Let's remove reflectivity for now, just to not confuse ourselves. But then I want the same pattern but inverted or reversed going to specular color, so that the shininess is happening where the black of the transparency is happening. Okay? So kind of a interesting thought experiment. So it's kind of a little bit, when you get into more complex stuff, and feel free to look at my channel. I have several videos talking about utilities, okay? You can kind of look and see what's out there as far as what these utilities can do. They can do some pretty wacky things. So I encourage you to look at those. So without that reverse, if I just had it like I was before, out color to specular color, you can see that kind of little hot spot there. When it goes over the green, you don't see the hot spot anymore, only where you don't see the green, okay? So again, with reversed, going to specular color, there's the hot spot on the green, but you don't see it where there's no green. See that? So that's kind of a little trick. You can invert or reverse your textures with this reverse node. It's really cool and handy to do stuff like this, for example. Okay, I think we're going to call it there. So this is just an introduction to the Hypershade. I definitely, like I always say, encourage you to explore further. If you have any questions, which I'm sure you might after this, as it was just kind of an introduction to the concepts of using the Hypershade, post them below. I'd be happy to answer those. Anyway, I will see you next time. Maybe next time what we're going to do, just thinking out loud, I might change my mind, we'll see. But I'm thinking next time, maybe we will go into a little bit of Substance Painter. In my classroom, normally I would teach, some basic Substance Painter for making textures, like making your own custom textures, right? Even though my channel is predominantly a Maya channel, and this is a Maya 101 playlist, talking about Maya, most of the time. If you want to make your own textures, you got to get into Substance Painter, you got to get into Photoshop, that kind of stuff. So maybe really briefly, we'll do a little substance lesson. But this is predominantly meant to be kind of a Maya 101 class, but I want to touch on it a little bit. So we'll see. I might change my mind next time. Don't hate me if I do. But definitely ask questions if you have any, and I'll definitely talk to you later.